This video is brought to you by the University Writing Center, a unit of the Department of Rhetoric and Writing at the University of Texas at Austin. You can contact us at uwc.utexas.edu.
Welcome. My name is Michael, and I'm presenting on behalf of the UWC Grad Services at UT Austin. And I'll be talking to you today briefly about one common pitfall for graduate student writing, and that is a failure to explicitly identify one's contribution to the scholarship. So here's a bit more about what I mean by a failure to identify one's contribution to the scholarship. So when an author is writing a piece, writing a paper, an article, sometimes there isn't a clear distinction between the author's argument and the arguments already put forward in the literature, right? So as a grad student, as an academic, as a developing scholar, you are trying to, first of all, accurately summarize the literature, right, and what's been said before you, and then identify a gap in the literature that you are then going to fill with your own contribution, right? So, and if there isn't a clear distinction between your arguments, your own contribution, and the past literature, it becomes difficult to see how you're coming into the debate and what exactly you're contributing. A great way to see how this pitfall works and how best to address it, I think it's great to look at a particular example. So here's a paragraph that actually comes from one of my own papers, and I think it is an illustration of a failure to sort of explicitly define the contribution to the scholarship that's supposedly occurring here. So take a minute, pause the video, and read this paragraph. So here we have the paragraph broken down into smaller sections, right? So the first couple sentences are explaining Green's view, right? Explaining the view in question. Then there's a kind of a mini thesis of the paragraph, if you will, right? So the author has first explained Green's view, and now the author is stating there are problems with this view, there are problems with this idea. So far it's pretty clear about, you know, the past scholarship and how the author is approaching this past scholarship. Okay, it's in the latter half of the paragraph though where we start to run into issues. So there's a discussion here of why there are problems with Green's idea. So some of these neural areas are not associated with conscious reasoning, right? Some of them are associated with emotion. So it's questioning Green's thesis here, right? But it's isn't clear exactly what the author's particular contribution is here. So we have some studies cited, Berker, Klein, we have these would seem to be empirical studies cited, and then at the end of the paragraph we have Klein 2011 cited, and it isn't clear exactly where the author of this paper is entering into the debate, right? So is the author just citing Klein's argument, which Klein has already stated in the 2011 paper, and is the author just summarizing that argument, or is the author sort of using different studies, different empirical works to make a new kind of response to Green here? It's just not clear. We don't know exactly where the author is entering the debate. Here we have a revised version of the second half of that paragraph. So in the black text on top, that's the original text, and the red text on the bottom, that's the revised version. So in the revised version, it's becomes a lot more clear exactly which studies are contributing to which parts of the argument here, right? So we have the Berker, Kober, and Maddox studies, and they're showing that a particular part of the brain that Green discusses is primarily associated with emotion, right? So it's clear that the author is citing these papers to back up this one particular idea that this one part of the brain is associated with emotion. Moreover, it's more clear that Klein is playing a similar role, right? So Klein is pointing out that another part of the brain is linked to both conscious reasoning and emotion, and even the purely rational role of the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex has been called into question, right? So it's clear that it's much clearer now that the overall response to Green is not Klein's response; it's the author's response, right? It's the author is saying that Green's view does not work, but to do so, they are citing particular studies, right? So it's clear that the author's contribution, while small here, because it's building off of previous studies, it's more explicit, and summed up in that final sentence, right? Green cannot make the case that these regions make up a conscious reasoning neural network, and the reason that he can't make the case is because of these studies that have been carried out. Hopefully this has been helpful. On this final slide, I just sort of summarized some of the main points that I made. So first, be explicit about where particular arguments stem from, right? So know your argument, know the others' arguments that are found in the literature, and be clear about whose argument is which and where exactly you're bringing your argument into the debate, right? So, going along with this, be explicit about where previous authorship ends and where your contribution begins. So we talked a lot about this gap, right? So you find a gap in the literature and you're entering that gap. So you just try to be as explicit as possible about how you're approaching the gap and what your unique contribution is. And, this is important stuff, right? I mean, as an aspiring scholar, as an aspiring academic, you're eventually going to be submitting these papers to journals, and this is what editors want to see, right? Editors and reviewers, they want to be able to identify your unique contribution to the literature. So I found that a helpful way to do this, a helpful way to make sure that your contribution is clear, is to have your peers read it, right? So in a low stakes scenario where your friends or other people in your graduate program, ask them to read a few paragraphs, ask them to read your thesis paragraph, and just see if they can clearly identify your contribution to the literature. And if they're sort of unclear, if it seems a little bit vague, then that's perhaps an indication that you've haven't fully shown your contribution.